Election number three, 2010. Now, some of you may want to just jump to 2024 for your third election. I think you're going to be using that election for a whole lot of stuff because it is the most recent information. So it's good to have another one in your locker. But that's okay if you disagree. But 2010 is also very memorable. It ticks a lot of boxes for us, looking at the media, looking at policy, looking at outcomes. It was not a majority for any party. The Conservatives fell 20 seats short and entered a coalition with the Lib Dems, which is in itself unusual and interesting. The turnout was poor, really, although it was progress at the time, but it was 65%, so less than the other elections that we've seen. And the Conservatives won 306 seats with a 36% share of the vote, so that's hopefully easy to remember, whereas Labour had only 258 seats with 29% of the vote. Now, media is often what we remember for this. A lot went on. There were the first televised leadership debates, and in those, in front of a vast audience because of the novelty, Nick Clegg, the Lib Dem leader, performed best initially, and the others were caught often saying, "I agree with Nick," which became a little bit of a t-shirt slogan for a while and hugely boosted Clegg's profile. This sort of thing would have been followed for the first time on Twitter, with everybody discussing live what they were seeing. And it reflected badly for Gordon Brown, who seemed relatively stilted on TV, reading jokes off his notes. That's not the only thing that went wrong for Brown. He had a very famous gaffe where he called a Labour voter a bigoted woman while his microphone was still turned on, and he had to go straight back and apologise to her later live on television. Now, the leader I haven't mentioned yet was David Cameron. Cameron was really trying to be the new Blair, younger, centrist, compassionate, making the Tories electable. He talked a lot about diversity and care for others, while his opponents pointed out that he was actually an Etonian from a very privileged background. But he did well generally in front of the media, where Gordon Brown was starting to look a bit tired and a bit overly serious. He was very unfairly, I know that doesn't sound neutral, but I think objectively unfairly blamed for the economic situation, which was largely caused by an international banking crisis, which he did more than anybody to address, stopping the banks from going under, but causing a huge hit to the national purse. So by 2009, the country had entered recession. So this election was about dealing with that context. And the manifestos were very different. So the Conservatives had a radical approach to this. They said there needed to be immediate, significant spending cuts across all departments, including a slashing of welfare. Labour and Brown said that this was too much too soon, that the first shoots of recovery were there, and immediate cuts and austerity, as it became known, would be disastrous for the economy, disastrous for recovery, and disastrous for ordinary people. Now, the Lib Dems, their headline policy was to remove tuition fees for students, something that would come back to bite Clegg. Now, perhaps the most interesting thing here is the outcome. So the Tories were the biggest party, and constitutionally, they were able to have the first try at putting together a coalition. But interestingly, if the Lib Dems had said no, then it probably would have resulted in a Labour Lib Dem coalition, which would have had more seats than the Tories. And that's what Gordon Brown wanted. That's what Gordon Brown thought was a legitimate outcome. But Nick Clegg agreed to a deal with the Tories, agreed to austerity, thinking that he could get through some constitutional reform, such as the referendum he was promised on AV, and other things like the Fixed Term Parliament Act. But in truth, the Conservatives forced him to be the one who increased tuition fees, and after 5 years, the Lib Dems were wiped out. Their 57 seats became 8, and Clegg himself lost his seat. So it was a bit tragic for them in the end.